Pete Roque. I'm the Code Enforcement Director with Four Leaf, and welcome to our Code Concepts with Rachel and Pete. Rachel Patterson is unable to join us today. She's a little bit tied up. That's the nature of our business. And so today we have Lorena Souls here with us, and Lorena is on the CASI Accessibility Board. And Lorena will talk a little bit about what that is. Today's topic is accessibility and the importance of accessibility in what it has to do with code enforcement. So, with that, I'm going to introduce my good friend Lorena Souls. We have a lot of history. We work together. We made the transition from local municipality into the private sector, and we are loving it at least I'm loving it every second of it. So
I am too.
so Lorena, can you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourself, what your role is at Four Leaf, and a little bit about accessibility.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Lorena Souls. I work with Pete Roque for Four Leaf. And what I do is I'm the building services manager, and I go out and meet with different municipalities and see what their needs are for staff augmentation, plan check review, which also includes accessibility, which is where my passion is. A little bit about myself. My background is more as a permit tech. I've been in the building industry for about 25 years and mostly spent as a permit technician for about 18 years. Later, I got into residential plan review, and from there, I got introduced to accessibility through the plan review process. And you would see it at intake when permit techs are taking in plan reviews. We see all that. So with that wherewithal, I was like, my supervisor and my mentor then, he was like, why don't you consider taking the CASP exam? And that's kind of how it all came to fruition. So, yeah.
So what is CASP?
CASP, it's Certified Accessibility Specialist, and it's a program that was brought forward through DSA, who was instructed through the statutes to create this program so that there would be more education from the CASP to business owners to educate them on their responsibility to provide access. And so with Senate Bill, this is just going back through the whole process of it all and how it came to be. The Senate Bill 1608 is which provided DSA the authority to write the program. And through that, a lot of different architects, code officials, people started becoming aware of it because it was then made a requirement that certain municipalities had CASP employed through them. And so because of that, that's just where my interest came. And mostly because my interest in accessibility came because my mom is losing her vision. She's actually going blind. And so she's struggles with just depth perception. She has very narrow vision. And so, when I have a uncle who's a wheelchair user, and Pete, you have your brother too. So it is very near and dear to me. And so that's where all my interests began.
So right now with CASP, I know there's not a lot of you guys in existence. How long has this program been in place?
Just a little over 10 years. And right now, I don't even believe there's 1,000 CASPs yet. So I'm CASP 833. And I know right now with the last testing that just happened in June, they're in the 900s now, and they're getting closer to 1,000. But that doesn't mean that the CASPs that are certified are actually active. So, the numbers are like 1 through, let's say, 1,000. But there are some that are not renewed. So it doesn't mean that they're active CASP. And then those that are CASP, they're not all like municipal government CASP. They're independent consultants, whether they're just an accessibility consultant or they're an architect that's practicing. And the CAS program, really what it is, it's part of CRASCA, which stands for Construction Related Accessibility Compliance Act. And what happens is if a CAS goes out and does an inspection for, let's say, a 7-Eleven for the business owner, and lists out all their violations, all their barriers to accessibility, it provides them with what's considered qualified defendant status. So they take their report and they go through and they make the fixes, like let's say they need a curb ramp, or let's say they need to adjust their door pressure, or they need to provide a accessible service counter. So whatever the needs are, whatever's identified in the report, as long as they're showing progress and they're making those, removing those barriers, they have the qualified defendant status, which gives them a 90-day stay should they get sued for something that's listed in that report. They have 90 days to fix that, and it basically stops attorney fees from building.
Okay. And one of the things that I've heard about the CAS exam, and I know it's scary for a lot of people because in the building world, I've heard it called the bar of the building test because it's so difficult to pass, and having 10 years and only 1,000 people certified really tells me a lot about that test, how difficult it is,
Right.
and in conjunction to that, I believe there's certain types of certifications out there for different states for accessibility. Is that correct?
Yes, there are. Even there's an accessibility plan reviewer that you can study and become certified through ICC as well. It isn't the CASP exam. It's, and as far as I know, I haven't taken it yet, but as far as I know, it's really not comparable to what you need to know to study for the CASP exam. I know the ICC accessibility is more geared towards the ANSI, which is another standard that's used for accessibility. The ANSI A117 has been around since 1961. So, and that was actually the first technical guidance that that was what the law was based off of, was that ANSI. So that's how long it's been around in the, I don't know, I lost my train of thought. So
It's all good, I learned about CASP, and it's one of those things that I don't think enforcement officers really focus on, on CASP. And so we have, oh, by the way, we have a quick question. It says, can you talk a little on CalDAG as a resource?
oh yeah, sure. So Mike Gibbons, he's a great guy, and he put together the CalDAG, and it is a great resource. I've taken a lot of DSA trainings. So Ida Claire, she's the state architect, first female state architect, but she's amazing, and she actually put together the CASP 101 program, which if you plan on taking the CASP exam, you should actually take that, because it's a great segue into preparing for the CASP exam. But the CalDAG, she talks about a bunch of resources in that module that she teaches, and the CalDAG, there's also Walking Through Accessibility, the CARM. There's different resources out there, but your main resource for accessibility should be the California Building Code or the 2010 ADAS, and if it was built prior to even the 1991 ADAS. They're all great resources, but there's always that opportunity for there to be some kind of error. So, as a CASP, always verify if you're trying to interpret something. They are good resources, but DSA also has an interpretive manual that is an additional resource that tells you their interpretation, and it has the DOJ interpretation and the DSA interpretation. You can download that from DSA's website.
Sure. And one of the things for code officials, I first got I've been in code enforcement for over a decade, and I didn't really know anything about accessibility until I met you. And one of the reasons that it was you're like, it's funny because we had the discussion that you're such a ADA nerd, that you just love. I mean, if you ever see Lorena walking around, she carries a stack of books, and if you see Lorena, she's so tiny and he has these big books. I'm like, hey, let me get your books. She's like, nah, I got it, But and Lorena is one of those folks that takes the time to explain things to you. I saw Lorena's presentation when she did Building Safety Month in 2019. She did an excellent presentation to make it more simplified for us code officials on what it is that we should be looking at. And in talking to my peers, I know the accessibility was discussed on the next round at IPMC hearing. So this is something that's going to be interesting because I always say, there's certain things that are going to come to the forefront, and accessibility is one of them. As more people are becoming disabled due to like diabetes or obesity or even COVID or the side effects. I mean, people are needing more accessibility. Accessibility, just period. And can you see you as a normal person on a normal day? What. And just like me with code enforcement, I can't turn it off. I'm driving down the street. I'm like, oh, look at that, look at that, look at that. And it's funny because me knowing Lorena personally, my wife went through a presentation to see if she can get it to a layman's person, which she did. And all of a sudden, my wife thought she was like a this accessibility expert. I'm like, hey, hold your roll. She's a CASP. So she's looking at her own business, and she's like, well, we don't have the sign, and it's not tall enough. I need to talk to my guy. She's like, hey, slow your roll. That's not your responsibility. It's up to the property owner, to fix these things. And currently, a lot of our places don't have a lot of enforcement mechanisms. We do have some striping that we need them to comply. If they, if somebody tears up their parking lot, we can say,
Right.
hey, you now have to meet your striping requirements.
Right.
And that's when a municipality can come in and say, hey, by the way, your mix, you don't comply with current ADA or whatever. And that's people like Lorena that catch these kind of things. So Lorena, you as a normal person, when you go to your local, to go get a haircut or your groceries.
Gas stations.
Huh? So,
Gas stations. I can't.
gas stations.
I got
What
a
are
gas
common,
station. I'm like,
what are
oh,
common
boy,
things
I
that you?
want-
Yeah, and that's how I am. And it's funny because people stop inviting me to their homes because they think I'm just going to narc them out on every illegal thing that I see,
You
and I'm
might
like,
come to my house.
so it's one of those things. So what do you see when you're out and about in town, and what are normal things that a person might not realize that it may be an accessibility issue, and what are kind of things that you see?
There's a lot of violations everywhere when you're looking at the specifics of the code, because it just, let's say hypothetically going to a gas station, striping, a lot of times, I mean, striping is missing at the top of the access aisle. So it has to be its full perimeter, and it's always at the top border is never striped. And so that's a violation that could be listed in a lawsuit. Now, does it prevent access? No, it doesn't. But the fact that there are people out there who will sue you based on just striping, because there are those high frequency litigants that will search on Google just because it's easier. They can find where the parking isn't, it's not up to code, right? So, but it may have been up to code at a previous code cycle, but they're kind of going after someone who's not up to current code. They're going after the fast dollar. And so those are small things. You'll have detectable warnings, which are the little bumpy yellow truncated domes that you see everywhere. They'll place those sometimes within the access aisle. They'll place them within like door maneuvering clearances, especially when doors open up and you're automatically outside on a parking pattern access style, because there are a lot of historic buildings that were built just that are not, they're pre-ADA. So they were built before the ADA and they're just not up to code. And those buildings are typically harder to bring up to code. So when I go to a gas station, it's really hard. Like, that maybe they don't have lever hardware. They still have old doorknob hardware. You have some veterans that are back from war and they've lost their limbs and they don't understand that, maybe they can't turn and twist the doorknob. That's why lever hardware is required. There's a lot of things. Like it's really hard for me to go anywhere. Even my husband thinks he's an expert because we just sit and talk. We commute a lot up north to the Central Valley, and he's like, "Oh, babe, did you see that? Or did you see this?" I'm like, "Oh, that gas station was so bad." Gas stations are notorious.
It's funny. I never seen somebody gas for ADA like, but just for the sake of this program, because we have a lot of people that aren't code officials. What are those yellow bumps for?
Well, they're actually to assist the blind. So, before, back in the day, a lot of cities didn't have curb ramps. And so they knew that when they came to a curb, obviously, that they were now going into a vehicular way. Well, once cities they started to put in all the curb ramps, they needed another avenue to inform the blind, like, hey, you're going into this vehicular way. And so those detectable warnings provide them that knowledge, because that they're going into a hazardous vehicular way where there's possibility they can be hit or just be injured. So, but that's the purpose. They are for the blind. Typically, from what I understand, yellow is the last color that a person going blind or a vision impaired person can see. And I believe that to be true because, like I said, my mom's losing her vision and she can see yellow very well.
So we did have a question, and the question was, can you talk on hardships as related to accessibility compliance, TLS, etc.?
Okay, so I think that's TI for tenant improvements.
Oh yeah, TI. Oh, we have TI.
TLS.
Yeah, tenant improvements. Yes. Sorry, Cecilia. She's gonna murder me. So just for clarity's sake, tenant improvements are when somebody upgrades their business. For example, they're moving into a new a new place and they're upgrading. Normally, a tenant improvement is the reconfiguration of those things. So go ahead. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I can tell you from my permit tech experience. So working the counter, you'll see a tenant improvement come through. It's an office building and now or it's an office space rather, and now they're going to convert it and it's going to be a restaurant. So one, there's a change of use, right? And two, they need to bring up their accessibility for this tenant improvement. So let's say, Cece's, that's funny. So let's say their construction cost is $100,000, and 11B202.4 exception 8 indicates that you need to bring up the accessibility areas that are not compliant up to 20% of the construction cost. So you have $100,000 that you're spending on your tenant improvement, which means now you need to add an additional $20,000 to bring up any accessibility that may not be to compliance. So typically there's specific items listed in that code section that indicates what they need to bring up to compliance for that 20%. Now you would bring up the path of travel or the accessible route from the sidewalk to the building entrance. You're going to work on the entrance of the facility. You're going to address the restrooms, bring those into compliance. so there are about 5 items, and it does include parking and some signage, telephones, which you don't see too much of those anymore. So don't really, look at those because many people aren't putting in telephones. Everybody has a cell phone. So basically, let's say getting back to the hardship, there's a lot of items that cannot be addressed, or it's going to cost, maybe instead of $20,000, it's going to cost $120,000 to make these repairs, and your construction cost is at $100,000. Then you would say, okay, Mr. Building Official, I would like to apply for a hardship because these things I'm bringing into compliance, but these things I can't because it's going to exceed the cost of construction, where it really does become a hardship that maybe the business owner cannot even open because that's just too much money, So that's where that kind of comes in.
And typically, what kind of improvements do you see that come across a permit counter? That is it like doors? Is it bathrooms, restrooms? Is it just pathways, walkways? What do you typically see? Like I know all of those things are required, but what's the most common thing that you see people normally have to come into compliance with that probably wasn't there before?
Um, Definitely the entrance, the accessible route from the sidewalk to the facility entrance. Because you really want to get people into the building, right? And so then when you get to the entrance of the facility, you want to make sure your threshold's in compliance. Why get them from the public way to the entrance of the facility, and then you got to step to get into the building? So you really got to get them to the entrance of the facility. And then when you get inside, like I said, telephones are almost obsolete. So you go into the restroom, and let's get the restroom into compliance. And a lot of times, these historic buildings, or not historic, but older facilities that were built prior to the ADA, they'll have old, really small restrooms. And you can, as part of your alteration, depending on fixture count, water unit use, and all that, you can take 2 restrooms, remove them, and create 1 restroom that is accessible for all.
So just like with code enforcement, there's always options for people to comply, and sometimes people pick a more cost-effective option than a non-cost-effective option, right?
Yes.
And normally, do you see sometimes that the ADA requirements kind of are a deterrent to some of the folks that are trying to open a first time business owner? Do you feel like sometimes, do you see that it could be a deterrent sometimes?
Yes, but I think for the most part, people want to comply, because one, they want to get their business open, but two, they just don't know how. And a lot of times, architects, they have to take so many hours of CEUs training for accessibility. But within those hours, if you're not specializing in accessibility, it's really hard to know everything, because architects have to know a little bit of everything, right? They need to know the structural, the architectural, the MEP portions. And so, and then there's accessibility. So there's all these different codes that they have to be aware of. And you can't be an expert in all of them, but you can certainly be an expert in some of them, right? So a lot of architects, because they don't know, some of their details, they're outdated, and it makes it hard. So coming back to the customer and then them wanting to comply, but if they hire the wrong architect that's really not specialized, like when you do tenant improvements, there are some architects that are specialized in restaurants, that's all they do. Or there's some that are specialized in medical facilities, that's all they do. So if you're a business owner and you are going to be hiring an architect to do your tenant improvement, you really want to hire someone who specializes in that expertise. Because if you get a medical facility architect trying to do something for a restaurant and help a customer out, their client, their knowledge is there, but it's still slightly different. So they may miss something.
And Cecilia made a great point that there's value to knowing ADA compliance, what it looks like for code enforcement, because sometimes we do trigger people to, to come in and get permits, and all of a sudden it turns into like, hey, a stop work order into a like now you have to come in ADA compliance, which is like, and it's nobody really likes, if somebody's skipping the permit process is because they're trying to be cheap sometimes or
Yeah,
trying to bypass, and now you're adding a whole layer of ADA compliance, which makes it, it's like a double punch in the gut, and we get it, but at the same time, like you said, I personally have family members that disabled, and my brother can't move his hands like this, like stuck all the time. So him pulling a door, it's, or even pushing a door, he can push a door, but if the door is really heavy, like one of the things I've learned is the door has to be a certain, for a senior citizen or somebody to be
five
able to
pounds,
push.
five
Yeah.
pounds of pressure.
And people don't take this in consideration, or counters that have to be a certain height for
Correct.
folks in wheelchairs, or and these are, so what are common things that you see, for example, I know you stress on some of them, but what are things that, like, somebody, let's say for somebody who is disabled with eyesight, what are kind of things, like little things that may assist them in, being more accessible friendly?
Well, when you have transitions, like for instance, for eyesight vision impairment, my mom, for instance, she has no depth perception. And there was a time when we were walking on a concrete path, and there was a step that you take down. And she, without, there wasn't a yellow stripe or a black stripe or any contrasting stripe. So she wasn't able to see that step. And me, I felt so bad. I forgot to tell her, because usually I walk in front of her and I say, okay, mom, there's a step right there. Or, okay, mom. And I forgot to tell her there was a step right there. So there's no contrast. So the concrete just looked like it was a full flat walk to her. And she just fell down face first. And there's my little mama, she's only 4'10", she's little, and she's on the ground. I'm like, oh my God. So just little things like that, on walks or curbs, if you can put some contrasting striping, like I prefer yellow just because that is they say that is the last color someone vision impaired can see, right? But anything contrasting will help those who are vision impaired. And there is a code section in chapter 11B of the building code that indicates for all exterior stairs, they shall be striped. They'll have a contrasting stripe. And interior stairs, you'll have one at the top and bottom of the stair run. So, but that is something that's important.
So one of the things that I saw, for example, in the, because of you, I updated our website for Standards and Codes Academy and the code enforcement educators to be ADA compliant, and have those things, because websites too, those could be subject to a complaint, and so you have to have, like, different text size, and I mean, there's different things that we have to do for our websites as well, and people don't. And I go to a lot of city websites, and a lot of city websites don't have it, which is like,
Right.
you should check out your city website or your own personal websites,
Right.
to assist, visually impaired folks. And some of them have the read to text features on them. I know there's a standard for websites, so I know there's one, and we meet that one. So, and the other thing is, like I said, I'm very involved in code enforcement. As you can see, I have this, I'm on here like as much as I can, informing the public. And I was on the phone with Rachel, and Rachel's like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And it happens because someday I'm not going to be here and she'll be here.
Right.
But at the end of the day, this, to us, bringing out information is so important. And you are an equivalent as far as in the ADA world, because I know you go to a lot of meetings, you go to attend a lot of things, and a lot of trainings. You train yourself, and I know you have a study group of folks for people that do want to get CAP certified. I'm not ready for that yet, but I will be, and I will hit you up. But can you talk about some of the involvement that you're in the accessibility world, and what kind of resources are there for somebody that wants to continue to learn about accessibility?
Wow, there is so much great resources out there. Right now, I'm a board member for CASI, which is the Certified Accessibility Institute, and we work on putting out a lot of training because one, you want to stay up to date. Two, we need the CEUs for our renewals, right? But there's the US Access Board. They have a fantastic website. They have actually they have some really good animations for those that don't understand why door pressure needs to be a certain way, or the 18-inch strike side maneuvering clearance on the pull side of the door, why that's needed so someone in a wheelchair can maneuver operating that door. They just have such great animations. They have service counter animations. What else? They have toilet facilities, bathing facilities. They have just a ton of information out there. And then there's like the DOJ. There's also I think it's called First Housing, which kind of goes over like the FHA information. But there's a ton of resources out there, and I can look up some of the websites and share them with you later if you want to put that out.
Sure. And
But
if somebody, yeah, if somebody wants to, anybody in the audience, if somebody wants to check out the Cassie website, it should be in the comments. So check that out. Also, you can take a look at the website to see what kind of resources are out there. For code enforcement, this is my prediction. I think it's going to head in the way of us jurisdictions enforcing code enforcement. For accessibility, we just put on an article on the code enforcement education and news Facebook page. They actually created a position just to enforce ADA somewhere in the Midwest, and that I see that as a trend growing, kind of like stormwater or massage enforcement or cannabis enforcement, lead enforcement. Those are things these are specialized fields in code enforcement, and I see this morphing into it now that we're talking about it in incorporating some of those into the IPMC. So to me, that this is where we're going, and as code enforcement grows, so is the need for specialization in these types of enforcement. And because we do get the calls like, hey, I couldn't, the stairs are a little wonky, the stairs are like this far tall from each other, and us as enforcement people, we enforce it under the building code because it wasn't built correctly, but we don't really take account the accessibility portion of it. So
yeah. And you know what? You and I had this conversation some time back when we were working in municipal government, right? So what it comes back to, I think, Pete, I think you and I, we were chasing the code and we were following the code, right? And finding this code path, like, hey, how can we have this person? We have received a complaint that their striping was dilapidated, right? The whole parking lot was. And we're like, how can we use the code to enforce this? Because typically, building departments, they can only enforce 11B. We cannot enforce the ADA. The ADA is enforced through litigation. It's enforced through the DOJ. When they bring the hammer down. So what we did is, if your municipality adopts the IPMC, right, there's a code section in the CBC that says it refers to the IPMC. And then when you go back to the IPMC, it indicates that you need to have that building maintenance. And part of that maintenance, we can say, hey, is your striping. It's your walks. There's all these divots. There's no smooth transition. So you can really use those codes to enforce it.
yeah, and then that's one of the things that I've helped out a lot of municipalities that don't have the IPMC. they adopt certain codes. For example, in California, and then even in other states, they still use the 97 uniform housing code.
Yes.
So so when somebody tells you, hey, this is 20, that was 20 years ago. I mean, 20 years ago isn't really a long time ago. I mean, even 30 years ago, almost, I'm thinking, right? It's almost 30 years. So,
Yeah.
and you're thinking it's a 30-year-old code. And, you know, if you're using the building code, like you said, we found like how it's adopted through an adoption, and we're like, wow, that's genius. Especially if you're not using that code, the building code does, in California at least, it allows you to use the International Property Maintenance Code as a standard, unless your city decides to strike that and not use it at all. But
And a
most
lot of
cities.
cities do. A lot of cities do. It's luckily we work for a municipality that did adopt it, but I recognize that a lot of cities do not adopt it, and that's a powerful little code. It's what, like 50 pages, but it's a
Mhm.
powerful code.
And what Cecilia is saying is very pertinent to rental inspection programs. Of course, there's so many there's so many, that little book is just packs a punch,
It does.
and I think, and for me, that is my code, and the model codes, that's my favorite one. And Cecilia is a nerd about that one, and she loves it. And I can pick on Cecilia because Cecilia does a show with me on Tuesdays, where we interview like code professionals, and we talk about their journey, and and more about leadership, and their styles and their programs. And
Uh-huh.
on Fridays here with Code Concepts with Pete and Rachel, or Rachel and Pete, sorry. What do you call it? It sounds better. So what do you call it? We focus more on the general things that we may see in code. For accessibility is a perfect example. Accessibility is, people don't in code really don't look at that. It's and one of the things is like we enforce like vendors. Okay, well, are we really enforcing vendor? What's the problem with a vendor? Well, other than they're selling thing and they might not be washing their hands and all that other stuff, what's
Right.
the other issue that when they put themselves on? What's the other issue?
Accessibility.
All
you
right,
know?
accessibility. What are they doing to the sidewalk?
Exactly. They're blocking the sidewalks. So, as part of cities' programs and services, sidewalks fall under programs, and you have to provide 48 inches clear for a walks, so people can traverse, whether they're wheelchair users or maybe they are on crutches for a short time, So, yeah, and sidewalk vendors do block the sidewalks, especially. I don't know if you've been downtown LA recently. There's a lot of underpasses under the freeway. The homeless are congregating there, and I've been driving where I've seen someone in a wheelchair actually have to traverse into the street to go around the homeless encampment because they're literally blocking the whole sidewalk. And so, that's all things that I don't think people realize. And that's another thing that we need to get under control and get some services out there to help people.
And one of the things for code enforcement is, there's in the ninth district, a court of appeals. It's not illegal to be homeless. So there's a lot of anti-camping laws that you can't enforce unless you have reasonable accommodations for those folks. If you don't have them, you can't enforce them. Well, at least in California, you
Mhm.
can't enforce any other unlawful camping. However, that has nothing to do with encroachment of and safety measures. That's a completely different, completely different thing. And a lot of police departments actually use those type of codes to be able to provide that accessibility to the public. And sometimes that means that the transients or homeless have to move. So I mean, if maybe they need to go on the bluff, or where they're not blocking traffic. So
Mhm.
there's different tools that code enforcement uses, to help people that may be affected by the lack of accessibility. And I think it's important to, for us to know these things, because at the end of the day, that's another tool that code enforcement can use, to achieve compliance, to make sure that everybody that uses those facilities are doing it right. And even municipalities, they're like, well, that the city's not doing that, and you're like, yeah, you're right. The city needs to step up and do their fix their facilities as well. And a lot of people are like, well, we don't have money. I'm like, well, you know what? You still need to fix them. I mean, that's the law. You
Yeah,
need to get it done.
through their capital improvement projects or whatever. I know, like, every city is required to do what's called a transition plan. So they're supposed to have a transition plan showing that they've reviewed all their facilities and they've compiled all their barriers, and then they work towards repairing those barriers. And a lot of them can be curb ramps or recreation facilities that need to provide access. And when you have that transition plan, you have like a guide to work through. So, but there are still some cities out there that haven't even done that, and it just amazes me, because it's like you said, it's been 30 years, right? The Americans with Disabilities Act has been around for a little bit over 30 years now. I think 31, but there's still so much non-compliance through government agency. I think even like Amtrak right now over in the East Coast, they're working on bringing a lot of their facilities up to compliance. They're putting in elevators for the subway stations, and they're doing a lot of upgrades, which should have been done probably many, many years ago. I've read a lot of articles where people trying to utilize the subway stations, wheelchair user, and then the elevator is not working. It's temporarily down. Well, it causes them to traverse back somewhere else just to try and get access to commute to work. So there's a lot. We have a huge responsibility as municipal government to provide access, and each city should have an ADA coordinator. And ADA coordinators are really important to government because they help ensure that access is provided to people who are trying to utilize city services, whether it's kids trying to participate in a swimming program, and maybe that one swimming pool where this particular class is being held doesn't have a lift to get someone into the swimming pool. Well, then they need to relocate that program to another facility so that someone can participate, this child can participate in that. Pasadena has an amazing ADA coordinator. I met her at I think it was the ADA Pacific conference we had here in downtown LA just before COVID hit, and she's fantastic. Fresno has an amazing ADA coordinator, Shannon Mulhall. She's put together some great programs out there for Fresno, and Fresno's doing really good as far as providing access and coming up, and she's on top of it. Especially, she's located in the Public Works Department. Each ADA coordinator is located in a different section of the city. Pasadena, she's located in the Parks and Rec Department. But the Fresno ADA coordinator, Shannon, because she's located in the Public Works Department, she's on top of their curb ramps. So she's got that city on lock and providing compliance. So as part of the CASI program we were talking about a few minutes ago, I've been able to network with many ADA coordinators and network with many CASP and ADA consultants through being part of that group, and it's been so great. So for people who are trying to become a CASP or even learn about accessibility, they should really look into CASI and become a member. If you can become a member, whether you're a CASP or you're not. So there's just so much available training and resources through being a member for CASI. So one of the things that we put together, Shannon and I, she's the ADA coordinator for Fresno, we put together this training program study like a specialist, and we host that for Cassie. It's a webinar that we put together that teaches people how to study for the exam. We don't give any test questions, any examples. It's just helping them how to build their study practice, and breaking it down on a week by week or month by month, depending how long you want to stretch your study practice out to prepare for this exam. So there's just a lot of resources that Cassie puts out there. If you're not a member, you should become a member.
Shameless plug. Shameless plug. But no, you know what? It's great that even accessibility folks have resources like this, and I know you're very heavily involved. I mean, when it was funny because one time I said handicapped and you corrected me. You're like, it's not handicapped, and why is it not handicapped, Miss Lorena?
Well, that's an old terminology, and it's actually codified in the ADA. It's how the statute's written. But as we've come into the 20th century, it's actually derogatory. It's a derogatory statement, meaning cap in hand, that someone's out begging for cash, or so it's a derogatory statement. So it's better, it's more appropriate to identify people with disabilities, like a person with disability or the disabled, but they do not want to be recognized as handicapped.
Yeah, and that was the first time, like, I was like, oh wow. I was like, oh, which is, but it's something that I learned. So I use the word disabled, and that's in the appropriate term. And it's funny because you probably, a lot of folks code, we don't realize that, sometimes things change, like the terminology changes, and and we become more aware of, the different types of disability. Like me having a family member that's disabled, I'm able to relate to the needs of the disabled, because
Right.
even like an elevator not being fixed, you know uh, i I use code to say, hey, you need to have your elevator maintained, but it's really, and it's for the benefit of the disabled. And we say, hey, they need to have accessibility to go up and down the flight of stairs, because my brother is a heavy guy, because he has very low mobility. And I mean, he walks like a mile. He can walk. I mean, he walks slow, and we're sitting there. We're like, oh, come on, man, the movie's starting, but you can't walk any faster. But and having to carry him up the stairs, like help him, like step by step by step. It's tedious, and if there's things out there that can assist them, like an elevator or a ramp, it makes life so much easier for him. And yeah, it cuts down on the time for us, but that's not really what the point is. The point is, like, what he should, the disabled have, they should be able to enjoy things just as much as everybody else. So
Yes, no, I agree. Maintenance is important. It's actually in the statute and it's in the building code. So we have the obligation to maintain accessibility, at least to the code cycle that it was implemented, and or the current code cycle, for new construction. So a lot of times, you'll see just painting. I mean, painting doesn't cost a lot. I think even someone on a fixed budget can put a little bit of money away monthly and then say, hey, I'm going to get my access aisle, or I'm going to get my accessible parking striped. So even that maintenance, so it allows for people to identify that this is where their space, where they can park and they can get out and have access to a facility. Signage is low cost for maintenance. Have your braille and your exit signs, have them posted up, so that way people who are wayfinding along walls, they can feel those signs when they're walking, because most vision impaired people, they'll walk along the wall, and that's why it's important to have signs at the strike side of the door, so they know what space they're entering. So there's a lot that can be maintained without a high volume of cost. Even the DOJ has a list of 21 things that they consider low cost that should be maintained. And the building code also includes a list. I believe it's the same. So, and you can find that at 202.4.
So, and one of the questions that might be asked for code enforcement, sometimes we know these folks can't afford it. Have you seen any programs, or do you know of any programs that would help, like any grants are out there that would help, like a business owner or homeowner, repair their home? I know there's HUD grants that do that, but is there
Mhm.
anything for commercial or through the Department of Commerce or anything like that? Have you heard of anything like that?
Yeah, there's actually, like, you can take out a loan for a certain amount for accessibility upgrades, and you can get a pretty sizable tax credit on your taxes for doing these accessibility upgrades. So there are programs through the banks that are out there that can assist people. Even, a lot of stuff is, there is a list that is low cost, that they can make these improvements, right? That business owners can make these improvements. And for stuff that is more expensive, that may not be high cost to other, like McDonald's, they're like, ramp, okay, no problem, right? But maybe for a small liquor store owner, putting in a ramp is like, it's going to take him a year or two just to save to for the concrete, for the contractor, for the permitting process. So they can go secure a loan, and they can reap the benefits of the on their taxes for that.
Awesome, and this is great information, And Lorena, what's your contact info if anybody has any questions for you?
You can email me at my personal email, which is Lorena at accessibilityassurance.com. And you can put my cell number. They can reach me by my cell.
Okay,
I'll Calls that I don't know definitely go to voicemail, but I will call you back.
and then that should be correct on the right.
Yes, that is correct.
Cool. So it's Lorena Accessibility Insurance.
Assurance, not
Sure.
insurance.
Sure. My bad. Okay, and they could always. I'm not gonna put your phone number on the chat because it'll be out there.
Thank you.
You'll get random calls. So if somebody really wants to learn about accessibility, please reach out to Lorena. She's always willing and able to assist. You guys can reach me if you ever have any code enforcement questions. I'm gonna leave my email here as well. Let me see. I sometimes I leave the. Here is my email. If you guys have any questions, feel free to contact me. That's my email. So with that, thank you for joining us today, Lorena. I know you were kind of an impromptu guest, and I like filling up our spots. That way, people get consistent with our shows. We are booking our shows, and we are getting more people involved with our expertise in providing information to the general public. And hopefully this can assist somebody, help somebody at least you know uh, turn a trigger on to kind of like, hey, maybe I can enforce this, or maybe I can help somebody out that's having this issue. And I think having these guests on our platform is so important because we're all over the, like you said, like architects have to know this and this and this. Code enforcement, we have to know this and this and this. So
Right.
it's very similar. We're jack of all trades, and we like to say we're masters of code. But so but thank you. And Rachel did send love. She's
Oh,
is busy, but
I'm sorry
she
I missed her.
it's all good. And I know you are our avid watcher, and I love it. And
Yes.
we appreciate you, and thank you for coming on our show.
Thank you for
Some of
having
the
me. It's
folks,
been a pleasure.
yeah, and then some of the folks in the chat will be eventually be our guests as well. So, anyways,
Wonderful.
with that, I thank you very much, and I will see you next time. We do these programs on Tuesdays where we feature people from across the country, in leadership and managerial portions to kind of give a take to help understand where we're coming from as far as like strategy and implementation of code enforcement programs and leadership and those kind of things. And Fridays is for general information such as accessibility, or we have a receivership program coming up, which is should be awesome. We have some on mental health, we have some on report writing, we have so much going on. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us, and I will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.